Brazil was life-changing, career-changing, everything. In meeting rooms, especially when I first started down in Brazil, and I would go to partner meetings with Carlos, I would be not only the only female, but usually the youngest person by a couple decades at least. And so that was just a little bit shocking in general because I've been so spoiled growing up in this environment. But also if I were to ask a question of the partner, they would look at Carlos and respond. And so there was just a lot that I had to learn about what is my presence in that meeting, where do I sit relative to Carlos so that I don't look like his assistant or his sidekick and I look like a valued member at the table. It's just other things you have to think about that in this environment, I think that we don't really even have to focus on.
I think you did something that was smart too, which was you had a conversation with Carlos about it, and not that I'm sure he was aware of it, but you talked to him specifically about the things that you wanted to work on and how you were feeling about some of those, because I think often we can leverage other people, whether it be male or female, to help set up how we want to be viewed in a meeting or what we need to get accomplished. And I'd say for the first few years of being at Adventures, I got a ton of feedback around be more confident, whether it was after meetings or on my reviews. And the reality is you can't change that overnight, but I think overnight you can change things that you do that make people perceive you to be less confident. Questioning yourself in front of others, or the tone of voice that you use, or certain word choices.
The hard part for me was understanding that me holding back my opinion because maybe I didn't feel like I had all the facts or I didn't know enough about everything, it actually made me look less confident and like I was just being quiet, which I think is what a lot of people struggle with. They don't know the right answer, so they just don't say anything at all, which I think is the absolute wrong answer. Just pull from whatever experiences you have to form your best opinion at that time and put it out there. And it's okay to be wrong. It's okay to double back and say, okay, now that I've heard a different perspective, this is what I think now. But you need to put out that initial opinion first, and that not only makes you look confident, but it makes you feel engaged in the conversation and like you deserve a seat at the table.
I was guilty of kind of assuming that those members of my team that weren't voicing their opinion and weren't actively participating in the meeting, I thought they were, not being engaged. I thought maybe they didn't have an opinion. One of the things that I was coached on is, if you want to get them involved, just ask them. So you might have to adapt your style a little bit. Maybe they're not going to proactively bring up their opinion, but kind of turn and say, well, what do you think about it?
I think a lot of people who are more reserved in meetings are always worried, well, what if I don't know the answer to the follow-up question to this? And the reality is we're never going to know the answers to all the follow-up questions that could potentially come out of this idea that you throw out there. And I think it's still very valuable to put it out there in the first place, and if it needs to be followed up with afterwards, that's great too.
One time when I was in a meeting with Rodney, and it was clear that Rick was testing me and definitely testing my knowledge of the numbers and the business, because there were two distinct questions that I still remember that I did not know the answer to at the time. And in that moment, I just said, you know what, I don't know the answer to that question, but I'll find out and I'll get back to you. And I got feedback from Rodney afterwards, and he was like, that's the way to handle it. If you don't know the answer, don't just make something up. Just assert yourself and assert that you have responsibility over whatever that thing might be, and that you're going to take the ownership to follow it up later. I think that still displays confidence without knowing all of the answers.
I think for people who are more reserved in meetings, another big way to boost their confidence is to just get to know the other people in the room and get to know them on a more personal level. I think when you're in a room of a bunch of friends, it's a lot easier to put out a more risky idea.
I feel oftentimes people who are more reserved, they'll say something and everyone's like, oh wow, that was such a good thought, a good idea. And then the feedback's always going to be, how do we get them to talk more? Because often they've been thinking, they've been pulling all these ideas together, and then when they say something, it has really a lot of weight to it versus the person who's just talking the entire time.
How do you give that feedback though? Just thinking about this person is normally more reserved, but when they have ideas, they're really good. And then the feedback is that how do we get them to talk more when maybe that's not natural for them?
Yeah. I think it goes back to a little bit of what you said before. I think when they do, encouraging that and telling them, hey, when you said this, here's why it was so valuable, and here's the impact it had on the meeting or on the ideas that we had. And knowing that they're never going to be the most vocal, but then I think it also gets back to what Stephanie said is, if there's a meeting and you're talking about something that you want their opinion on, ask them.
In my case, there's even been times where I've staged it in the sense of, hey, can you take this as a takeaway, go back, spend some more time thinking about it, talk to other people on the team, and come back and kind of share with the team what we think we need to do as a result. And after they've done that enough times, you start to see them kind of naturally doing those types of things.
Also, just like who's invited to a meeting. I think if you're very intentional about who you invite and even let them know why they were invited to a meeting, might draw out those additional perspectives.
That's a good
I
point.
think that's the value of agendas. They go in knowing, hey, they want to hear what I have to say, and that may open them up a little bit to communicate as well.
Yeah.
And it probably also helps as we get bigger as a company. I think knowing everyone all really deeply that you're in a meeting with probably gets the chance to get lower and lower. And so I think that'll probably help with that too. If people aren't as comfortable with the audience in the room, maybe they're at least comfortable with the material or the topic or the agenda so they can contribute more.
Giving my first business review, I actually had just gotten my Fitbit and was getting used to the heart rate function on my Fitbit. And just my heart rate leading up to the business review was kind of like climbing Mount Everest, you could say. I think what I realized, though, is that everyone gets nervous for these things, and there are different ways that you can cope with that, but you're just going to want to get more practice at it, more swings at the bat.
I think if I had to give one piece of advice that she is around communication, it would be to be intentional about it. The style which you communicate, the tone that you're setting, the word choices that you use. I think a lot of times people think that really good communicators are just naturally good, and they probably are, but I also think they spend a lot more time than you realize thinking about all those things, which is what makes them continue to be really good communicators.
I think I spent or wasted the first several years of my career thinking that if I ask the question, it's going to seem like I don't know, so let me go try to figure it out somewhere else. And you can't just assume that it's, because, I didn't go to this school and so I didn't learn that, or I didn't have this experience in life so I didn't learn that. Just ask the question, and you'll find that people are really open to giving you the answers and walking you through things.
So I think too often we second guess ourselves that we don't know the right answer or that we don't have all of the answers to the most difficult questions. And if you just bank on the fact that you're at this table or in a meeting room or giving a business review on a topic for a reason, I think it will pay dividends.